Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm Frederick County Executive Jan Gardner. Joining me today is Linda Norris-Walt, who was the chair of the Ethics Task Force. Welcome.
Hi, Jan.
So thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate your volunteerism and your leadership as the chair of the Ethics Task Force. For our viewing audience, I certainly want to explain a little bit about the difference between the Ethics Task Force and the Ethics Commission and your charge and your role. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what the Ethics Task Force accomplished?
Sure. The Ethics Task Force, just by its nature, a task force has a beginning and an end. So that's the most basic difference between the task force and the commission. The commission is an existing body that looks at potential ethics violations or advises folks on whether they might be in violation or have a way to not be. What we were charged to do by you, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, is to look at the ethics laws, the various levels of ethics law, and the way that they're implemented, that the Ethics Commission uses to make its rulings. And we were a group of volunteers that you appointed, and we had a charge to finish in 120 days, and that was our mission.
Okay. I know some of the things you looked at was ethics laws from other jurisdictions. There were certainly some topic areas about addressing conflicts of interest and adding penalties for certain ethics violations. Can you tell us a little bit about how you went about your work and how you looked at what others were doing?
Yes, what we did, we had 15 members on the task force, and we outlined, based on the charge that you gave us and what we all brainstormed as major areas that we had heard in the community, we had about 6 areas, broad areas, that we split up and had a series of public comment and then our own discussion on those areas. Things like the way the Ethics Commission operates, financial disclosure and conflict of interest, the state lobbying law. And we took each of those areas and put 2 per hearing for the months of February and March, and had a team, 2 or 3 people on our task force, research other communities and how they handled those issues. They brought to the whole group on those nights when we discussed them what they had found, and we used it to form our knowledge base for what our law might be short in or might be adequate in. Then in the month of May, we spent our meetings looking at those specific areas that we were charged in to decide if we needed to change something, and if so, how.
Okay. I really appreciate the organization and the leadership that you brought to the task force, because while 120 days sounds like a lot of time, when you're meeting a few times a month and you're trying to get public input, it's really a short period of time. And I think it's important for people to recognize that the task force made recommendations to strengthen the local county ethics laws. They made recommendations to change the Maryland public laws that apply to Frederick County in terms of campaign finance and lobbying, made recommendations on standard operating procedures, and then a few other miscellaneous recommendations. So there were a lot of topic areas to cover. I think there's so many of them, I'm not sure we can even talk about all of them. But at this point, we have drafted legislation to make changes to the local law, which should be introduced by the council on August 18th and then go to public hearing in September. So I want to really focus on some of the key areas like conflict of interest, how the members should be appointed, the penalties, and the financial disclosure statements. So can you talk a little bit about strengthening the conflict of interest provisions?
Yes, there were several areas that we were concerned about the way that our local ordinances were working. And some of the things that we wanted to change focused on changes that had been made in previous years to laws that had already, or ordinances that had already been changed. So we wanted to look at that. We also looked at the Ethics Commission itself and felt that an additional number of members would help. There was a lot of public perception that the Ethics Commission is a stacked group. I don't believe we actually felt it was as stacked as people thought, but because it was such a small group, we felt that that contributed to that. So we recommended that more people be appointed to the commission, which would bring it up to 7. We also recommended that the Ethics Commission be able to look at the people who do apply and recommend to you and to the council who they felt fit areas that they wind up considering, things like contracting, areas like purchasing, areas like real estate. What we would like to have them do is have people on the commission that have expertise in those areas, so try to recruit in those areas. Conflict of interest, we were very interested in expanding the conflict of interest and financial disclosure that is made by the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Planning Commission. Right now, those folks, it is not publicized to the public what their financial disclosure is. So we felt that the public needed to know that, as well as the top directors that are reporting to the county executive. So that was a area. We also were interested in the area of contracting, which interestingly came up during our task force period as an issue, and felt that it needs to be very clear to the citizens that there is no perception or actual undue influence by people who are elected to county office in terms of the business that's done and the contracts that are let. So that was one of the ones that we worked on.
So I do think that the public wants to trust that their elected officials are making decisions in the best interest of the public, that they're not personally profiting from their positions in any way, directly or indirectly, and that they're really have limited influences that would influence a decision to maybe make that decision outside the public interest. So it's really about ensuring trust in government, and I think it's very important, fundamentally important, for citizens to be able to trust their government.
Correct, and we are in support of the current bill that has been introduced to address that specific issue, so it will actually dovetail into the recommendation that we made.
So going to public hearing is taking the Ethics Commission to 7 members. It is a longer disclosure form for county division directors and for some of the key boards that make decisions like the Planning Commission. You know, I actually did solicit interest among the division directors on the longer form, and most did feel that it would not be a problem to fill out. It is a longer form that the elected officials fill out, and having filled those out at the state and federal level as well, I still think our financial disclosure forms are not overly burdensome. But they do allow people the opportunity, if they have a question about a conflict of interest, to see if one actually potentially exists. And
there were a couple the subpoena powers, which was one of the charges to look at, and we found that the subpoena powers are a very key thing, and the Ethics Commission actually had asked for that as well in a recommendation. And restoring criminal penalties, which was one of the things I had mentioned that had been put into the ordinance and had been removed from the ordinance. And we believe that when criminal activities relating to ethics are when the Ethics Commission rules that there have been criminal activities, there does have to be a penalty so that it discourages this to continue.
Yes. I think if there's no penalty, then your law has no teeth. So at one time there were penalties. The last administration took the penalties out, and now we're proposing putting those same penalties that were in place before back in place. So some of it is really just going back to the laws that we had in place before. Now, did you look at other counties to see if most of them also had similar conflict of interest provisions in terms of elected officials doing business with the county and also in terms of penalties?
Yes, we did look at other counties in Maryland, and we even took our scope outside of Maryland, and we looked at several aspects of the ethics topics that we were discussing. We looked at Florida. Tampa is doing a lot of work. There are several cities in California doing a lot of work. Harris County, Texas, had an excellent model that we used. And interestingly, our work was done with an eye to the future, but we also had a mandate from the citizens to look at things that had occurred in the past. And we tried to keep from using those as specific examples. But I will say that these other communities that were doing things that we saw as kind of the leading edge of where ethics is going, they had situations that they were addressing. So you can't get around the fact that what drives ethics are things that the citizens perceive as unethical.
Right, or actual things that have happened that raise it as an issue.
Correct.
But I think if you survey all of the counties in Maryland, that the supermajority of them do have conflict of interest provisions where elected officials or their companies
Correct.
cannot do business with the county.
Correct. I
And
think there was an article in the paper that I don't think that they interpret it correctly, because they actually do have those kind of provisions, and some of the counties that didn't have them or that had weak versions of them, I don't even think their elected officials always understand what their ethics laws are.
Now, one of the things that I talked about during the campaign process was trying to create an independent ethics commission. And we go partway there by having the existing members conduct the interviews and reviewing the applicants and making recommendations. Do you think there are ways to go beyond that, so where the elected officials themselves are really not making those appointments but maybe confirming them?
We went round and round about this because there are several models out there in the community that our group did not support in the communities around the country. And one of the ones that you see quite frequently is a division of appointment where the state's attorney might appoint one person and the council might appoint two people and the county executive might appoint two people. So it's split up among the different bodies. That seemed to be very common. We also saw in some states where they were more progressive because they were having issues, where they completely dismantled. In Florida, there was a city that dismantled the Ethics Commission and put it under an ethics judge.
Okay.
Because they could not find a way to take the politics out of the process. And that was one of the struggles that we had as a task force, was our wish to take the politics out of the process of who is appointed. And we could not find a model. So that was why we felt at this point in time the best way to do that is to recruit people who are not involved in politics to apply for the commission, which is why we made those recommendations. Now, we did follow up and put in our report that we felt an appropriate group like the League of Women Voters could probably study this and have access, tap into some more resources that we didn't have time to tap into. And the Vice Chair, Carl Bickle, and I are already meeting with the local league to start that process and see what they find.
And I think that is fabulous, because you can't stop your process because you haven't come up with the perfect solution to everything. So I appreciate that we're moving forward with recommendations, but with the understanding that there may still be ways out there that we can study further to do things even better. But I really want to thank you for your good work on the Ethics Task Force. I hope that the Ethics Task Force will come in and speak to the topics at the public hearing. And I do anticipate in the fall including the changes to the Maryland state law that applies for lobbying and financial disclosure to include in our legislative package. And then the delegation will obviously receive those in the November-December timeframe and have their own public hearing in December. So some of this will move forward in pieces over the next year. And so I want people to know that your work has created change, and that we're moving forward to implement those recommendations. And so it is a valuable public process where people participated in it, and it will change. It will change what we do in Frederick County and make Frederick County government have processes that ensures the public trust.
That's great, because I've never met a group of more passionate people about good government than those people I worked with. I'm sure we will
I
all
agree.
be out to
They did a
talk.
great job. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you learned a little bit about what's coming on the ethics front in Frederick County. We do have a public hearing coming up in September before the County Council to strengthen our local ethics laws. And you can learn more by visiting the county webpage. There is a special section for the Ethics Task Force. We'll put that link on the screen for you. And if you have any questions, you can certainly email myself or contact any of your county council representatives, and we encourage you to come in and participate in the public process, because public participation does make a difference, and it is our highest priority and value to have trust in county government. Thank you for joining us.